Sarah Martinez never imagined that joining the Marines would lead her to one of the darkest moments of her military career. Growing up in a small Texas town, she had always been the type of person who stood up for others. Her friends called her fearless, and her family knew she would never back down from a fight when something was wrong. The Marine base at Camp Pendleton was bustling with activity on that Tuesday morning in March. Sarah had been stationed there for 8 months, working her way up through the ranks with determination that impressed even her toughest commanding officers. She was known among her fellow Marines as someone who could handle herself in any situation, whether it was a training exercise or a real-world challenge. Sergeant James Morrison had a different reputation entirely. While Sarah earned respect through hard work and integrity, Morrison used fear and intimidation to maintain his position. He had been at Camp Pendleton for 3 years, and during that time whispers followed him wherever he went. Some Marines spoke quietly about his aggressive behavior, especially toward female personnel, but nothing had ever been officially reported. Morrison was a large man, standing 6 feet 4 inches tall with broad shoulders that seemed to fill doorways. His voice carried across the training grounds, and when he spoke, people listened not out of respect, but out of concern about what might happen if they didn't. He had a way of making others feel small, using his physical presence and rank to assert dominance over situations that didn't require such force. The tension between Morrison and Sarah had been building for weeks. It started with small incidents that might have seemed insignificant to outsiders. He would assign her the most difficult tasks during training exercises, often with impossible deadlines. When she completed them successfully, which she almost always did, he would find reasons to criticize her work or question her methods in front of other Marines. Sarah noticed that Morrison's behavior toward her was different from how he treated the male Marines in their unit. He seemed to take particular pleasure in trying to break her spirit, as if her success somehow threatened his authority. She had dealt with difficult supervisors before, but something about Morrison's approach felt more personal and more dangerous. Other Marines in their unit began to notice the pattern as well. Private Johnson, who had served alongside Sarah for several months, mentioned to his friends that Morrison seemed to have it out for her. Lance Corporal Williams agreed, saying that he had never seen a sergeant target one Marine so consistently without any clear reason. The base had protocols for reporting harassment, but Sarah hesitated to use them. She had worked too hard to get where she was, and she didn't want to be seen as someone who couldn't handle the pressures of military life. She believed she could manage the situation on her own, just as she had handled challenges throughout her life. What Sarah didn't know was that Morrison had been watching her more closely than she realized. He had noticed her routines, knew when she typically went to the gym or the mess hall, and had been waiting for the right opportunity to escalate their conflict beyond the professional disagreements they had been having. The base commander, Colonel Peterson, was aware of Morrison's reputation but had never received formal complaints that would warrant disciplinary action. Peterson ran a tight ship and expected his personnel to resolve conflicts through proper channels. He believed in giving his sergeants the authority they needed to maintain order, sometimes without looking too closely at how that authority was being used. On the evening before the incident that would change everything, Sarah was finishing her daily workout in the base gym. The facility was nearly empty, with only a few Marines using the equipment. She had always preferred exercising later in the evening when the gym was quieter and she could focus on her routine without distractions. Morrison entered the gym while Sarah was completing her final set of exercises. She noticed him immediately but continued with her workout, not wanting to give him any reason to start another confrontation. He moved through the gym slowly, not really exercising but clearly observing the other Marines who were present. As the evening progressed, the other Marines gradually left the gym until only Sarah and Morrison remained. She felt uncomfortable being alone with him, but didn't want to cut her workout short because of his presence. She had as much right to use the facility as anyone else, and she wasn't going to let his intimidation tactics change her routine. Morrison approached the area where Sarah was exercising, claiming he needed to use equipment near where she was working out. His movement seemed calculated rather than random, and Sarah began to feel increasingly uneasy about the situation. She decided to finish her routine quickly and leave the gym, but Morrison seemed to anticipate her plan. The gym's lighting created shadows in the corners of the large room, and the sound of the ventilation system masked conversations that might have been overheard in other parts of the base. Sarah realized that if something were to happen in this isolated environment, it might be difficult for her to get help, or for others to witness what occurred. She gathered her equipment and moved toward the exit, hoping to avoid any direct confrontation with Morrison. However, he positioned himself between her and the door, making it clear that he had no intention of letting her leave without some kind of interaction. The tension in the room was thick, and Sarah's military training kicked in as she prepared herself for whatever was about to happen. Morrison's expression had changed from his usual stern demeanor to something more threatening. Sarah had seen that look before in dangerous situations during her training, and she knew that the conflict that had been building between them for weeks was about to reach a breaking point. She took a deep breath and prepared herself for what would become the most challenging moment of her military career. Morrison's voice cut through the silence of the gym like a blade. "Martinez, we need to talk about your attitude problem." His words carried a weight that went far beyond a typical supervisor addressing a subordinate. Sarah immediately recognized the dangerous shift in his tone and body language. "I'm not sure what you mean, Sergeant?" Sarah replied, keeping her voice steady despite the adrenaline beginning to course through her system. She had been trained to remain calm under pressure, and every instinct told her that this situation was about to become much more serious than their previous confrontations. Morrison stepped closer, using his considerable height advantage to tower over her. "You think you're better than the rest of us, don't you? Walking around here like you own the place, showing up the male Marines, acting like you belong." His words revealed the true nature of his resentment toward her success and presence in what he clearly viewed as his domain. The accusation was completely unfounded, and Sarah knew it. She had always been respectful to her fellow Marines and had never tried to show anyone up. Her achievements came from hard work and dedication, not from any desire to prove superiority over others. However, she also understood that Morrison wasn't interested in logic or fairness. "Sergeant, I've always conducted myself professionally and followed all regulations," Sarah responded, taking a small step backward to maintain some distance between them. She was acutely aware that they were alone in the gym, and Morrison's aggressive posture suggested that this conversation was heading in a dangerous direction. Morrison laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. "Professional? Is that what you call it when you make me look bad in front of the other Marines? When you complete every assignment I give you and act like it's easy?" His anger was building with each word, and Sarah could see that reasoning with him would be impossible. The sergeant moved even closer, and Sarah could smell the alcohol on his breath. The realization that he had been drinking made the situation exponentially more dangerous. Morrison's judgment was impaired, and his inhibitions were lowered, creating a perfect storm for the confrontation that was about to unfold. "You need to learn your place," Morrison continued, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper, "and I'm going to teach you a lesson you won't forget." He reached out suddenly, grabbing Sarah's arm with enough force to leave marks. The physical contact crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. Sarah's training immediately kicked in. She had been taught self-defense techniques not just for combat situations overseas, but for any scenario where she might need to protect herself. However, she also knew that fighting back against a superior officer could have serious consequences for her military career, even if she was defending herself from assault. "Let go of me, Sergeant," Sarah said firmly, her voice carrying the authority of someone who would not be intimidated, despite the rank difference between them. She tried to pull her arm free, but Morrison's grip tightened, and she could feel his fingers digging into her skin. Morrison's other hand moved toward her, and Sarah realized that his intentions went far beyond verbal intimidation or simple harassment. The situation had escalated to the point where her physical safety was in immediate danger, and she would need to make split-second decisions about how to protect herself. The gym's mirrors reflected their confrontation from multiple angles, creating a distorted image of the violence that was about to unfold. Sarah caught sight of herself in one of the mirrors and saw the determination in her own eyes. She had not come this far in her military career to be victimized by someone who abused his authority. Morrison attempted to force her against the wall, using his size and strength to overpower her. However, he had underestimated both Sarah's physical capabilities and her mental toughness. She had not only completed the same rigorous training as her male counterparts but had often exceeded their performance. Standards. Sarah twisted away from Morrison's grip and created enough space to defend herself properly. Her movements were precise and controlled. Drawing on months of combat training and natural athletic ability, she struck back not out of anger but out of necessity, targeting pressure points that would incapacitate her attacker without causing permanent damage. The confrontation lasted only seconds, but those moments seemed to stretch on forever. Sarah's strikes were accurate and effective, designed to stop Morrison's assault while minimizing the risk of serious injury to either of them. She had been trained to use the minimum force necessary to neutralize a threat, and despite the circumstances, she maintained that discipline. Morrison stumbled backward, shocked by Sarah's swift and decisive response to his attack. He had clearly expected her to be passive or helpless in the face of his assault, and her effective self-defense had caught him completely off guard. The balance of power in the gym had shifted dramatically in a matter of seconds. Sarah immediately moved toward the exit, but Morrison recovered more quickly than she had anticipated. His humiliation at being stopped by someone he had tried to victimize fueled his rage, and he prepared to escalate the confrontation even further. The gym that had been quiet moments before now echoed with the sounds of their struggle. What neither Sarah nor Morrison realized was that their confrontation had not gone completely unnoticed. The base was never entirely empty, even late in the evening, and the sounds from the gym had attracted attention from Marines in nearby buildings. Help was already on the way, though it would arrive at a crucial moment in the developing situation. Morrison charged toward Sarah again, but this time she was ready for him. Her defensive stance and focused expression made it clear that she would not be an easy victim, and that any further assault would be met with equal force. The sergeant was about to learn that his victim had become his opponent, and the outcome of their confrontation was far from decided. Morrison's second attack was more vicious than his first attempt. Fueled by alcohol rage and the humiliation of being effectively defended against, he abandoned any pretense of maintaining his authority through rank alone. This was no longer about military hierarchy or professional disagreements. This had become a violent assault that could have deadly consequences. Sarah saw the change in Morrison's eyes and knew that her life was now in immediate danger. The training that had been drilled into every Marine took over completely. She was no longer thinking about military protocol, career consequences, or the fact that she was defending herself against a superior officer. Her focus narrowed to pure survival. As Morrison lunged forward, Sarah used his momentum against him. She stepped to the side and used a defensive technique that sent the much larger man crashing into a rack of weights. The sound of metal clanging against metal echoed throughout the gym, followed by Morrison's grunt of pain as he collided with the equipment. The impact should have been enough to stop most attackers, but Morrison's rage seemed to override his body's signals to retreat. He pushed himself away from the weight rack and turned back toward Sarah, blood now trickling from a cut on his forehead where he had struck the metal bar. "You're going to pay for that," Morrison snarled, his words slurred by both alcohol and anger. He picked up a small weight from the floor, transforming the confrontation from hand-to-hand combat into a potentially lethal encounter with a weapon. Sarah realized that Morrison had crossed a line from which there would be no return. The weight in Morrison's hand changed everything about the situation. Sarah was now facing an armed attacker who clearly intended to cause her serious harm. Her military training had prepared her for exactly this type of scenario, and she responded accordingly. The rules of engagement were simple. Neutralize the threat using whatever force was necessary. Sarah grabbed a towel from a nearby bench and began circling Morrison, using her superior speed and agility to avoid his increasingly wild swings with the weight. She could see that his coordination was compromised by the alcohol, but his strength and reach still made him extremely dangerous, especially with a weapon in his hand. Morrison swung the weight toward Sarah's head, a blow that could have caused fatal injuries if it had connected. Sarah ducked under the swing and countered with a precise strike to Morrison's wrist, causing him to drop the weight. The metal hit the floor with a loud crash that seemed to echo throughout the entire base. The loss of his weapon seemed to enrage Morrison even further. He charged at Sarah with his full body weight, intending to tackle her to the ground where his size advantage would be overwhelming. However, Sarah had anticipated this move and was ready for it. Using Morrison's own momentum once again, Sarah executed a throw that sent the sergeant flying across the gym floor. He landed hard against a wall mirror, and the sound of breaking glass added to the chaos of their confrontation. Shards of mirror scattered across the floor, creating additional hazards for both combatants. Morrison lay motionless for several seconds, and Sarah hoped that the confrontation was finally over. She moved toward the gym exit, intending to get help and report the assault immediately. However, as she reached the door, she heard Morrison stirring behind her and realized that the danger was not yet past. The sergeant struggled to his feet, using the wall for support. His face was now covered in blood from multiple cuts caused by the broken mirror, and his movements were unsteady. However, his eyes still burned with the same rage that had started the entire confrontation, and Sarah knew that he was not yet finished with his attack. Morrison picked up a large shard of broken mirror, creating an improvised blade that was potentially more dangerous than the weight he had wielded earlier. The jagged glass caught the light from the gym's fluorescent fixtures, and Sarah could see that Morrison was prepared to use it as a weapon. "This ends now," Morrison said, his voice barely recognizable due to his injuries and continued intoxication. He advanced toward Sarah with the glass shard raised, clearly intending to inflict serious harm or worse. The confrontation had escalated to the point where someone's life was likely to end in that gym. Sarah knew that she had only seconds to act before Morrison reached her with his improvised weapon. Every moment of her military training focused into this single instant of decision. She could not retreat any further, and Morrison's intent to cause her serious harm was abundantly clear. As Morrison raised the glass shard above his head, preparing to bring it down toward Sarah, she made her move. Her response was swift, precise, and devastating. Years of combat training and natural athletic ability combined in a single defensive action that would end the confrontation once and for all. Sarah's strike connected with Morrison's solar plexus, driving all the air from his lungs and causing him to double over in pain. Before he could recover, she followed up with a precise blow to a pressure point on his neck, a technique designed to immediately incapacitate an opponent without causing permanent damage. Morrison collapsed to the gym floor, the glass shard flying from his hand to shatter harmlessly against the far wall. He lay unconscious among the broken mirror fragments and scattered weights, his assault finally ended by the very person he had tried to victimize. Sarah stood over her attacker's motionless form, breathing heavily but alert for any sign that Morrison might regain consciousness and continue his attack. However, it was clear that the confrontation was finally over. Morrison would not be getting up anytime soon, and Sarah had successfully defended herself against a violent assault that could have cost her life. The gym fell silent except for Sarah's breathing and the hum of the ventilation system. She looked around at the destruction caused by their fight and realized that her life as a Marine would never be the same after this night. The gymnasium doors burst open with a force that echoed through the damaged room. 3 Marines rushed in, their faces showing a mixture of shock and disbelief at the scene before them. Lance Corporal Williams, Private Johnson, and Corporal Davis had heard the sounds of the confrontation from the nearby barracks and had come to investigate what they initially thought might be an equipment malfunction or training accident. "What the hell happened here?" Williams whispered, taking in the broken mirrors, scattered weights, and the unconscious form of Sergeant Morrison lying among the debris. His eyes moved to Sarah, who stood near the center of the destruction, her uniform torn, and her face showing clear signs of the struggle she had just endured. Sarah straightened her posture despite the exhaustion and adrenaline still coursing through her system. "Sergeant Morrison assaulted me," she stated clearly and directly. "I defended myself." Her voice was steady, but the 3 Marines could see the evidence of the violent confrontation written across the gym and on both participants. Johnson immediately moved to check Morrison's pulse while Williams secured the improvised glass weapon that lay, shattered against the wall. Davis pulled out his radio to contact base security and medical personnel. The 3 Marines had stumbled upon a situation that would have far-reaching consequences for everyone involved. "Is he alive?" Sarah asked, suddenly concerned that her self-defense might have resulted in Morrison's death. Despite everything he had done to her, she had no desire to cause permanent harm to another Marine, even one who had tried to seriously injure or kill her. "He's breathing, but he's going to need medical attention," Johnson reported after checking Morrison's vital signs. The sergeant had multiple cuts from the broken mirror, possible internal injuries from Sarah's defensive strikes, and was showing signs of a concussion from his collision with the wall. Within minutes, the gymnasium was filled with base security personnel, medical technicians, and military police. The quiet evening at Camp Pendleton had suddenly become a crime scene that would require careful investigation and documentation. Sarah found herself at the center of attention, but not in the way she had ever imagined. Captain Rodriguez, the base security chief, arrived and immediately began assessing the situation. She was known for her thorough approach to investigations and her commitment to ensuring that all Marines under her jurisdiction were treated fairly and according to military law and regulations. "Martinez, I need you to give me a complete statement about what happened here tonight," Captain Rodriguez said, her tone professional but not accusatory. She could see that Sarah had been involved in a serious altercation, but she was not making any assumptions about who was at fault. Sarah recounted the entire incident, from Morrison's initial confrontation to his escalating violence and her necessary self-defense actions. She spoke clearly and honestly, providing details about Morrison's behavior over the previous weeks and the events that had led to the physical confrontation. As Sarah gave her statement, the medical team worked on stabilizing Morrison for transport to the base hospital. His injuries were serious but not life-threatening, and he began to regain consciousness as they prepared to move him. His first words were incoherent threats directed at Sarah, which several witnesses overheard and documented. The other Marines who had discovered the scene also provided statements to Captain Rodriguez. Williams, Johnson, and Davis all testified that they had heard sounds of a struggle from the gym and had found Sarah standing defensive over Morrison's unconscious body. Their accounts supported Sarah's version of events and provided crucial witness testimony. Word of the incident spread quickly through the base, as news always does in close military communities. By morning, nearly every Marine at Camp Pendleton had heard some version of what had happened in the gymnasium. The reactions were mixed, with some Marines expressing support for Sarah and others questioning whether the situation could have been handled differently. Colonel Peterson arrived at the base hospital where Morrison was being treated for his injuries. The sergeant was now conscious and coherent, though heavily bandaged and clearly in pain. Peterson needed to hear Morrison's version of events before making any decisions about how to proceed with the investigation. Morrison's account of the incident was vastly different from Sarah's statement and the evidence found at the scene. He claimed that Sarah had attacked him without provocation and that he had only been trying to defend himself. His story contradicted not only Sarah's testimony, but also the physical evidence and witness accounts. The investigation into the incident would be complex and thorough. Military justice required that all aspects of the confrontation be examined, including Morrison's history of behavior toward female Marines and Sarah's reputation as a dedicated and professional soldier. Captain Rodriguez knew that the outcome of this case could have significant implications for both Marines involved. Sarah was placed on administrative leave pending the completion of the investigation, a standard procedure that was not intended as punishment, but as a precautionary measure while the facts were determined. She understood the necessity of the policy, but found it difficult to be away from her duties and her fellow Marines during such a critical time. The base commander faced a difficult situation that required balancing military justice with the need to maintain good order and discipline among his personnel. The incident had already attracted attention from higher-ranking officers and would likely be reviewed at multiple levels of command. Sarah's fellow Marines were divided in their reactions to the incident. Some had witnessed Morrison's inappropriate behavior over the months and believed that Sarah had been forced to defend herself against a serious assault. Others were concerned about the implications of a junior Marine physically confronting a superior officer. Regardless of the circumstances, the gymnasium remained closed while the investigation continued, its damaged state serving as a reminder of the violent confrontation that had taken place there. Military police had photographed and documented every aspect of the scene, creating a comprehensive record of the evidence that would be crucial to determining the truth about what had happened that night. 3 days after the incident, Sarah found herself sitting across from Lieutenant Colonel Amanda Foster, a military lawyer who had been assigned to represent her interests during the investigation. Foster had a reputation for being thorough, fair, and completely committed to ensuring that military justice was served regardless of rank or gender. "The evidence strongly supports your account of what happened," Foster told Sarah as she reviewed the case files spread across her desk. The physical evidence from the gymnasium, the witness statements, and Morrison's own behavior since the incident all corroborate your testimony about defending yourself against a violent assault. Sarah felt a mixture of relief and apprehension. While it was reassuring to know that the evidence supported her version of events, she understood that military justice could be complicated, and that her career might still be affected by the incident regardless of the investigation's outcome. Foster continued reviewing the case details. We've also uncovered some disturbing information about Sergeant Morrison's past behavior. Several female Marines have come forward with complaints about his conduct, though none of them had filed official reports before now. It appears that your incident has given others the courage to speak up. The revelation that other women had experienced problems with Morrison was both validating and troubling for Sarah. She felt vindicated that her assessment of Morrison's character had been accurate, but she was disturbed to learn that other Marines had suffered under his inappropriate behavior without feeling able to report it. Meanwhile, Morrison was facing his own legal challenges. The base prosecutor had filed charges against him for assault, conduct unbecoming a Marine, and violation of several military regulations regarding the treatment of subordinates. His claim of self-defense was undermined by the evidence and by his history of problematic behavior. Captain Rodriguez had completed her investigation and submitted her report to Colonel Peterson. Her findings were clear and unambiguous. Sarah Martinez had been the victim of an unprovoked assault by Sergeant Morrison and had acted in legitimate self-defense. The investigation recommended that all charges against Sarah be dropped and that Morrison face the full consequences of his actions. The news of the investigation's findings spread through the base even faster than the original incident had. Marines who had been divided in their initial reactions to the confrontation now had official confirmation that Sarah had been defending herself against a violent attacker who had abused his authority and position. Colonel Peterson reviewed the investigation results with his senior staff and legal advisors. The evidence was overwhelming, and the decision was straightforward from a legal standpoint. However, Peterson was also concerned about the broader implications of the incident for base morale and the treatment of female Marines throughout the military. Sarah received official notification that she was cleared of any wrongdoing and would be returned to active duty immediately. The letter from Colonel Peterson not only exonerated her but also commended her for her courage in defending herself and for her continued professionalism throughout the investigation process. Lieutenant Colonel Foster met with Sarah again to discuss the aftermath of the incident and her options for the future. You've been completely vindicated, Foster explained, but I want to make sure you understand that this experience might have lasting effects on your military career that go beyond the legal aspects. Sarah appreciated Foster's honesty and concern. She had already been thinking about how the incident might affect her relationships with other Marines and her prospects for advancement. While she had been cleared of wrongdoing, she knew that some people might always view her as someone who had been involved in a violent confrontation with a superior. Officer Morrison faced a court-martial that would determine his punishment for the assault and related charges. The evidence against him was substantial, and his defense attorney advised him that his best option might be to accept responsibility for his actions and seek a plea agreement that would minimize his sentence. The base community was gradually returning to normal, but the incident had sparked important conversations about sexual harassment, assault prevention, and the treatment of women in military settings. Several policy changes were implemented to improve reporting procedures and to ensure that Marines felt safe coming forward with complaints about inappropriate behavior. Sarah's fellow Marines welcomed her back to active duty with a mixture of support and curiosity. Some approached her to express their admiration for her courage in defending herself, while others seemed uncertain about how to interact with someone who had been at the center of such a dramatic incident. Private Johnson, who had been one of the Marines to discover the scene in the gymnasium, spoke for many of his colleagues when he told Sarah, "What you did took real courage. Morrison had been getting away with his behavior for too long, and you put a stop to it. A lot of us respect you for that." The three Marines who had found Sarah and Morrison in the gymnasium became important witnesses in Morrison's court-martial proceedings. Their testimony about what they had observed helped establish the timeline of events and supported Sarah's account of the incident, Sarah found that returning to her regular duties was both comforting and challenging. She was grateful to be back to the routine of military life, but she also had to deal with the psychological aftermath of the violent confrontation and the stress of the investigation process. Colonel Peterson personally met with Sarah to discuss her future at Camp Pendleton and in the Marine Corps. He wanted to ensure that she felt supported by the command structure and that the incident would not negatively impact her career advancement opportunities. Martinez, you handled an extremely difficult situation with professionalism and courage, Peterson told her during their meeting. Your actions that night may have prevented other Marines from becoming victims of Morrison's behavior. The Marine Corps needs more soldiers like you. Sarah appreciated the colonel's support, but she also knew that the real test would be how she was treated by her peers and superiors in the months and years to come. The incident had made her more visible within the military community, which could be both beneficial and problematic for her career. 6 months later, Sarah Martinez stood before nearly 300 Marines assembled in the base auditorium for a special ceremony. What had begun as the darkest night of her military career had evolved into a moment that would define not only her future, but also the future of many other Marines who had been inspired by her courage and determination. The court-martial of Sergeant Morrison had concluded 3 weeks earlier with his conviction on all charges. He was sentenced to reduction in rank, forfeiture of pay, confinement for 18 months, and dismissal from the Marine Corps. The military justice system had worked exactly as it was designed to work, holding Morrison accountable for his crimes and sending a clear message about the consequences of assault and abuse of authority. Colonel Peterson took the podium to address the assembled Marines. We are here today to recognize extraordinary courage under the most difficult circumstances, he began, his voice carrying clearly through the auditorium. The events of that March evening tested not only one Marine's physical and mental toughness, but also our entire military community's commitment to protecting each other and upholding the values we all swore to defend. Sarah felt a mixture of pride and humility as she listened to the colonel's words. The months following the incident had been challenging in ways she never could have anticipated. While she had been completely exonerated and received tremendous support from many of her fellow Marines, the experience had changed her perspective on military life and her own role within the Marine Corps. The ceremony was not just about recognizing Sarah's actions that night in the gymnasium. It was also about the broader changes that had resulted from the incident and investigation. The base had implemented new training programs focused on preventing sexual harassment and assault, improved reporting procedures, and enhanced support systems for Marines who found themselves in difficult situations. Lieutenant Colonel Foster, who had represented Sarah during the investigation, was also present at the ceremony. She had continued to work with base leadership to ensure that the lessons learned from this incident would benefit other Marines who might face similar challenges in the future. The courage displayed by Marine Martinez that night was remarkable. Colonel Peterson continued, but equally remarkable has been her continued professionalism and dedication to her duties and her fellow Marines in the months since. She has transformed a traumatic experience into an opportunity to make our entire military community safer and stronger. During the investigation, 7 other female Marines had come forward with complaints about Morrison's behavior, and 2 male Marines had reported witnessing inappropriate conduct that they had not previously felt comfortable reporting. The incident had opened floodgates that had been held back by fear, uncertainty about the reporting process, and concerns about potential retaliation. Sarah's actions that night had prevented Morrison from potentially assaulting other Marines and had removed a dangerous individual from a position where he could continue to abuse his authority. The investigation had revealed a pattern of behavior that might have continued indefinitely if Sarah had not defended herself so effectively. The base's new training programs included realistic scenarios based on the Morrison incident, teaching Marines how to recognize warning signs of inappropriate behavior and how to respond effectively when they witnessed or experienced such conduct. Sarah had been involved in developing these programs, sharing her experience to help educate others. Captain Rodriguez, who had conducted the initial investigation, spoke about the importance of thorough and fair investigations in maintaining military justice. Every Marine deserves to serve in an environment free from harassment and assault, she said. When that environment is threatened, we must respond quickly and decisively to protect our personnel and maintain good order and discipline. The ceremony included the presentation of several awards, including a commendation medal for Sarah recognizing her courage in defending herself, and her continued contributions to improving base safety and training programs. However, Sarah was most proud of the broader changes that had resulted from the incident rather than the individual recognition she was receiving. Private Johnson, Lance Corporal Williams, and Corporal Davis were also recognized for their quick response to the incident and their courage in testifying during the investigation and court-martial proceedings. Their willingness to get involved and provide accurate testimony had been crucial to ensuring that justice was served. The Marine Corps had used the Morrison case as a teaching tool at other bases and in leadership training programs throughout the military. Sarah's story had become part of the curriculum used to educate Marines about their rights and responsibilities in preventing and responding to sexual harassment and assault. In her own remarks to the assembled Marines, Sarah emphasized that her experience, while traumatic, had ultimately strengthened her commitment to military service and to protecting her fellow Marines. "None of us should have to face what I faced that night," she said. "But if someone does, I hope they know that they have the support of their command, their fellow Marines, and the entire military justice system." The ceremony concluded with a renewed commitment from base leadership to maintain the improvements that had been implemented following the Morrison incident. Colonel Peterson announced that the training programs and policy changes would become permanent parts of base operations and would be regularly reviewed and updated as needed. Sarah remained at Camp Pendleton for another year before receiving orders to a new assignment that included additional responsibilities related to military justice and Marine welfare programs. Her experience had opened new career opportunities that she had never previously considered, and she looked forward to using her knowledge to help other Marines. The gymnasium where the incident had occurred was renovated and reopened with new safety features, including improved lighting and communication systems. A small plaque near the entrance reminded Marines of their responsibility to look out for each other and to speak up when they witnessed inappropriate behavior. Years later, Sarah would look back on that March evening as a turning point, not just in her own life, but in the lives of countless other Marines who had benefited from the changes that resulted from her courage and determination. What had begun as one woman's fight for survival had become a catalyst for positive change throughout the military community, proving that even in the darkest moments, courage and determination could create a brighter future for everyone.